Well, hello and welcome to the final session of the Current Careers in STEM Role Model series. And today we'll be hearing from Dr. Tayaba Zafar. My name is Scott Cummins from the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, better known as ATSE, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all this morning, and I hope you're well wherever you may be. As we gather for this session from different places around Australia, I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we meet. I'm joining today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, and I pay respect to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who join us online today. As we share and discuss our own knowledge and practices, we also recognise the deep knowledge forever embedded in custodianship of country. Now, before we commence, I should point out that this session is being recorded and will be added to the Stellar YouTube channel for you to revisit anytime you like. You'll also notice a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So if you have any questions you would like to ask Tayaba as we go, please drop them in there and we'll get to these in our discussion following Tayaba's talk. Finally, at the conclusion of this session, we'll be sending out a feedback form, and your feedback's essential to let us know what you might like to see and experience, or who you might like to hear from in next year's series. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Tayaba Zafar. Now, I won't go into too much detail about Tayaba's career, as I'll leave that to her, but I'll say that Tayaba is an astrophysicist, an astronomer and lecturer at Australian Astronomical Optics at Macquarie University. Tayaba studies dust, gas and metals in the interstellar media of distant galaxies. Tayaba also works on collaborating with the astronomical community to work on defining the science for upcoming instruments on telescopes around the world. And I'll now hand over to Dr. Tayaba Zafar to talk in more detail about her work and her own STEM journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Hello, everyone. I will first of all acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I'm sitting in. I'm talking from Macquarie University, and I acknowledge that the Ndaru people and their elders, past, present, and future. As already, thanks to Scott, he mentioned that I'm an astrophysicist. So Stellar program very much the name works with me because I'm an astrophysicist, and Stellar is all about the stellar science we do. And I am partly actually doing stellar science, which I will tell you a little bit today. Yes, I am senior lecturer at Macquarie University and work for the Australian Astronomical Optics. And what I am going to tell you today is already being mentioned, but starting on, as Scott already said, that I'm doing kind of two roles. So my current role at Macquarie University as a senior lecturer is that I perform instrumentation duties. And then along with that, I also do some research on dust science, which I will tell you a little bit about that. And for my instrumentation duties, we work on million and billion dollars of instrument programs which run across the globe. And we just take, like an industry, we take contracts through them, build these instruments in our labs here and ship them to telescopes around the world, helping the science to flourish more, helping the more astrophysics which we can learn about with these new amazing instruments, and the technology which we offer, as we always come up with an innovative technology. And I will tell you a little bit how. And then for my research, of course, I work on dust science, and I can tell you that you already must have known this word dust, and for you it sounds like rubbish, but no, it is for astronomy very interesting. We see these vast we see these vast like voids in the sky, and it appears to us that, oh, there is nothing behind that, but dust is telling that it is the thing which is creating everything in the universe. So how we get to know dust? First, I need to tell you that how you see it. So the information we see from our eye, of course, in our astrophysics or physics in general, we know that light is coming at different wavelengths. You might know the popular ones like radio or gamma rays, but it is in optical, infrared, microwave. You have seen these things around, you know these, but of course, we always receive this information mostly in the optical regime, because that's what we can see. And what we cannot see, we think there is no information, but dust is telling us there is lots of information. There are lots of photons which are missing. An example could be like the one you are seeing here is a blow dryer. If you just turn it on, you see, oh, there is just air coming and it's a little hotter, right? But that's not it. If you see it at different wavelength, for example, on your right side is the infrared wavelength. If you try to see it on, you see, oh, there is so much information. What is making this hot? Why we are seeing it? Different information at different wavelengths or frequencies is telling us that there is a lot more which we need to understand, and there is a lot more which we cannot see with our eyes. We are missing it. And same it goes for the telescope, the big ones which we work on. For example, if we turn on a telescope, if you see the top left image, you might see, oh, there is a hole in the sky or there is a void. We have no information, no stars shining in that region. And we keep on looking at different frequencies here. You have wavelengths or frequency, one or the other, whichever you pick. And we keep seeing that, oh, it is not available at this frequency, for example, or it is not available there. But if you see it closely, you see there is something started popping up at different frequency when you choose for, and then you keep on going, in this case, higher wavelengths or smaller frequencies. You keep on checking, and then you see, oh, this hole, which you see nothing before, now you have stars shining in there. And this gave us the first idea, although this is one of the popular examples, but I will tell you, it is now known from almost a century that, oh, there are some dust particles which make us look that there are holes in the sky. But actually they are impeding our view to the universe, and they are blocking the lights from the photons which could have come to us, but they are absorbed by those particles, and then suddenly things started shining. So if we collate this whole image which I've shown you there in multiple colors, it will look something fancy like this one, which means all this red region is dusty, there is a cloud of dust, and then everything else which is yellow or blue, these are our stars, and they are still shining. Just the stars in red are a little bit more dusty because there is dust. So what we call dust in the universe is, once we see these kind of things there, in our universe, it's mostly gas. You might have heard from your school time that universe is like 99% hydrogen, and that is very true. Most of the universe is hydrogen, or most of universe, even in other elements, whichever we see, they are in gaseous form or in gas. But if these gas particles get to combine and form compounds, then we call these dust. So these complex compounds which we see, they are dust. Actually, dust is the only thing in the universe which is in condensed matter phase. If there is no dust, why I said it interesting early on is, if there is no dust, it couldn't be us, it couldn't be this planet, it couldn't be this whole solar system or the universe. Why so? Because these dust particles, as they are not gas anymore, these are complex compound, they create everything else in the universe. Once we have these dust particles, they form the new stars, they form new planets, asteroids, meteorites, which are hitting on our planet Earth, and even us. So we are coming from these dust particles, and these dust particles at the ends are coming from stars. So whatever this stellar thing is, this is telling us how stars are important, how the creation or the nucleosynthesis happening in stars is important to get different elements. And then these elements land on our planet or in our body. So that's how all this story of dust is, and that's why it was very important. So during my research period, when I found that dust is so interesting, but at the same time, it is something which people normally ignore, because you need different wavelengths to look into. So people normally ignore that, okay, we just correct for this information and get the other relevant information which is available in optical. So this was something from the beginning, which was very exciting for me to see, that why not chase this missing information? Why not look at different frequencies and see that what more we can get out of it, or what is impeding our view, how it is at the end landing in our body. So I was always looking into these questions throughout my research career. For you, those who are very young, If you want to see this dust, you have the Milky Way dust lane. You can just go on a bright night, a very dark, not bright, of course, a dark region, and you can look into the sky and you can see that EMU in the sky, that dust lane, which is running through the center of our galaxy. So if you see that center of our galaxy, which is all you can see in this image here, you can see there is lots and lots of dust sitting in the center of our galaxy. And of course, it looks like it is blocking our view, but there are so many stars shining behind that. And this dust, of course, might be creating new stars, new planets, new comets, new asteroid, whatever you name it. So that's how you see it. This is your first view. Or if you just want to see yourself, this dust landed in you. Now, how we study it, of course, it's not like we just see different images and say, oh, there is dust and there is not. I don't want to scare you. I don't want to tell you the more detail about it, but I want to tell you this dust is in different shapes and we can study here with this plot. Here we have our frequency at the x-axis, and then we see that how much light we are losing at different frequencies. So here we have infrared, we see almost no dust there. And as we go from optical to the ultraviolet, we see more and more light absorption is happening at those wavelengths. And at the same time, we see when we study our Milky Way, here blue one is the Milky Way, green one is the Large Magellanic Cloud. It is a small cloud around our Milky Way, which eventually at one day will merge in our galaxy. And the same goes for a Small Magellanic Cloud, which is next to it. All of these things, because of the gravity, are pulling each other, and Milky Way will dominate and we'll get LMC and SMC, which we call Small or Large Magellanic Cloud, from the Magellanic streams one day. So here we see all of these are different when we try to study dust. Couple of them, as you can see, they have some dust feature, which we call an absorption, as it is inverted version. So it is absorption, but it is looking to you like an emission. But here we see that there is an absorption at optical wavelengths, while for the red one, which is Small Magellanic Cloud, we see nothing. So we are studying this from almost like 30-40 years. And we get to the point that why is this so? We took different references, checking it back in emission, checking it more in absorption, modeling it in the lab, doing some experimentation. We came out to the point, okay, these kind of absorption in the optical are coming from carbon, while if there is nothing, or at every wavelength, there are more silicates. Now, I'm using broad terms, but it means many, many particles contributing, forming these kind of different compounds, and then giving us this shape at the end. Why I bring it is because this kind of feature, at least for our Milky Way, was first studied in 1965. So much work being done at that, like see at 1965, still they have enough information that they can model it. And now we have best ever telescope of the times, and we can see things in more detail. But they still came to the point that this might be coming from carbon at that time, and they can see, and later on more observation help us telling that, yes, it is actually due to carbon. So they enforced the result, which was obtained at a very small scale in 1965. So, but if we know this from 1965, and if it is still about our Milky Way, I was always looking not inside our Milky Way, but going and seeing, studying beyond our Milky Way. What we call in our astronomy term is extragalactic. So I was looking everything which is not in our galaxy, but everything which is beyond. And it could be up to the Big Bang if we can see through. So for this, I was using gamma ray bursts, what we call, or in short, we call them GRBs. And so these GRBs are very interesting. There is a whole story about how we get to know these GRBs. But even if not, we are talking about how we know GRBs. GRBs are still very popular. They are known, but only thing is that these are, as you can see in the bottom one, these are flashes on the sky, which can happen at any time. It can, even a GRB can happen now, or can happen in days. Like they can happen, they appear small blobs on the sky, or some small bright flashes, and then they disappear. And we know them through first their gamma rays, because first we get from a GRB a gamma ray, And after the gamma ray, we see the rest of the frequencies, and then it disappears on the sky. Why so? Because these are actually, you might have known already the word supernova. So these are what we call hypernova. These are even energetic than a supernova, a very, very massive star. At the end of its life, it wants to give up, and then it explode as a hypernova, or what we call a GRB. And then you see that flashes from distant universe coming to you, and they appear until that explosion is happening. And of course, after that explosion, everything settled down, and we see no light flashes coming to us. So that's why I pick, whenever I study extragalactic universe, these GRBs, because they are very bright. They can come from the longest distance possible, which we can observe. Actually, the first ones which we observed were like 600 million years after the Big Bang. That was very interesting. And we are aiming to see that the more closer to the Big Bang we can know, because it is the very young universe which just formed after the Big Bang. Then, as I told you, these are very, very massive stars dying at the end of their life. So they occur in very dense medium. That's why they are very interesting. As these are stars, so we get to see star forming regions, which is also an interesting point for them. And then they have a simple spectral shape. So once we want to model dust, we want to see absorption. It is very important that we have a simplest shape possible to see how much absorption is happening. So these are very interesting medium probes to study dust if we want to go for higher redshift. But at the same time, these interesting probes have their own problems. Like, as I said, these are what we call transients, or something which is just flashing on the sky and disappearing. So that's why they fade rapidly. They could just appear and gone in minutes. So we need to chase them after. They could stay on the sky based on how bigger they are or how the bigger event is. So they can stay for a couple of days, 3-4 days, a week or so, but then they go. So eventually they fade, depending on how long their flashlight is. And then as it's very intense event, like something just bursting out, so if there is dust around that star, that will also be impacted by that huge explosion. It can crack the dust, evaporate the dust, move it away. Any kind of influence it can give to that dust, we see it because of these very bright and very energetic events. So now, as I've given you already an example of the Milky Way, but when we go out, I already have shown you the Small Magellanic Cloud. We see things more like that Small Magellanic Cloud. That was the point of showing you that kind of graph. So it is very rare that we see something like Milky Way when we go out to the distant universe. And we are always after that question, why is this so? Why that thing which is like this feature in the optical is in the Milky Way, and why we go out and we find it very rare? So this was also one of the rarest case, which happened in 2018, where we go on and find, luckily after actually for gamma ray burst after a decade, we found that there is another feature in the dust curve, what we call as the Milky Way. Of course, Milky Way is still the red one. It wasn't as significant or as prominent as the Milky Way, but it was still there. And as I study extragalactic universe, and we know this is coming from carbonaceous kind of material, giving this kind of structure in the optical, I went on seeing that, no, I need to see more which metals can contribute to the dust. So there is lots which I studied across my career path, but I can't cover all today. A little bit I want to show something recent which I'm doing on is trying to identify which metals are bringing this up. Is this only carbon? Is this something else? So something new of discussion these days were iron being the biggest or third biggest contributor to the dust. So I went on seeing that what kind of iron can contribute. It could be very pure metallic iron, for example. It could be iron in form of iron oxide, which we call nanoparticles. So these are kind of like powdery stuff, which you can see there. But for dust, they are very important. These iron oxides, once you have there, either they are nanoparticles, but their contribution is significant enough that you can see that making all of this together, this all makes iron the third biggest contributor to dust. So I went on checking what this new metal introduction to the dust curve will be doing. And I took that GRB or gamma ray burst as an example, which was coming from a distant universe, and try to see what more we can infer, what more than the Milky Way, which we know already, we can get from this gamma ray burst. And when I try to model it with whatever the data available from the lab, and on top of the carbonaceous, which was already there, here the black ones are carbonaceous, and of course the feature, the optical feature is still coming from carbonaceous. Either they are hydrocarbons, for example, or either it is pure graphite in this case. Once we see the other feature, we find that more and more silicates are responsible, but this blue one is also iron. So pure metallic iron without any oxide is also responsible for bringing these kind of dust curves for us. So this is something very new, which we find, first time we find metallic contribution. And that was part of my research where I was checking what new information we can bring in. And that, as I said earlier, is all coming from what you want to see, how you can chase that missing information, what is not available. And as a researcher for the young kids, it is very important. You keep asking yourself question, you keep asking why and what's new, how you can bring in, how you can solve this puzzle, how you can solve this mystery. And the basic point there is not just solving a mystery which is existing, but finding a new question also is a problem. So that's what your research is. It wasn't a question before. I put this question and I ran after solving this. So that's very important. If you want to do science, you ask yourself question from what is already existing and what is not existing and why it is not existing. So that is very, very important. And that was part of my journey also. Now, of course, I talk a lot about data that we observe this, we get this, this is coming from the telescope. So if it is coming from the telescope, for us, it is very important to get it at the end. So all the information we receive is just not that we are getting it from the lab only or from the telescope. For us, it is very important to collect that information, which is in the form of data, and then try to understand it. Overall, for astronomy, as it goes for either the space telescopes, which you can see here, or for the ground telescope, I normally work for the ground telescope. It is very important to get that data. And for that data, you need these telescopes. So my other job, which I'm going to now, is also to build these telescopes. If you want to get data, you need these telescopes. And for this, you need to build these telescopes or build instruments on them, which can work at various wavelengths. Because as I said before, electromagnetic waves are traveling at different wavelengths. You know some, you might not know all, but it is important to get that information and then see, at least for astronomy. And so you get this information and then you see that how you can understand it. But at the very beginning, you need those telescopes. So how you build them. So my journey with the telescopes was starting when I was doing PhD. Of course, it wasn't part of the intro, but my background is that I'm from Pakistan. And there I was just working on physics. I'm talking about the era of 90s or late 90s, you can call. So I was a high school student in early 2000. Like I finished my high school when I was in 2001. So in 2001, yeah, somewhere around that time, I finished my high school. And it was just the time when I was in Pakistan, there wasn't internet. Like after 2000 or somewhere, the dial-up internet came for the first time. So not as much information I can have at that time, what you guys already have in your phone. So your phone is giving you all of the information. You can search around things, you can see everywhere. And it was at that time, the information was very limited. You rely more on books and libraries. And that was the time when I was young, I was growing up. I always wanted to see these stars and heavens. Like I go out in the countryside and I see all these vast lanes. Now I know all of this. And I didn't know at that time, like in your age, I didn't know all of this. So when I started my journey, I didn't know. I didn't know I wanted to be an astronomer. I didn't know even at that time there is a thing called astronomer. So all I know was that, yes, I like these things. I like reading about star formation and other stuff, but I need to choose physics. And at that time, particle physics was the thing. And after my high school, I know I like physics. I know from the very beginning, I was good in problem solving. And for me, maths was fun. I can sit down with a notebook and solve for hours and hours all the problems at the end of each chapter of mathematics or physics. So I love this, and I love doing that. So it was my own driver taking me. But later on, when I was in my bachelor's or master's, during my graduation, I figured out, no, I like reading more. And the first thing I started reading was Stephen Hawking's book, The Brief History of Time. And it took me to a new journey. And I was like, no, I wanted to be an astrophysicist. So it was for me very late to know what I wanted to do, because as I said, there weren't much opportunities. There wasn't much internet as you have now. There wasn't much information. And for me, there wasn't any role model which I can follow. And the first role model I got was through reading a book. I know I like this, but I didn't know how to go there. And then after my master's, I was applying for PhDs, and I got to Copenhagen for the first time at the Niels Bohr Institute at the University of Copenhagen, where I started my PhD journey. And that was also a very exciting for me. Of course, it now looks like a story. But at that time, when I applied for the first time, it was a coincidence that they run a written test. Otherwise, they normally pick based on the CVs. They run a written test. If I would have just applied with my CV, which was just physics, they would have never picked me. But when they conducted the written test, I applied in that. And because I've done so much reading beforehand, that I passed that exam. And I got into a PhD, and that changed my life. Just a physicist, from a normal student, I turned into an astrophysicist. So during my PhD time, as I don't know telescope before, I just had reading. I didn't have even formal education of astrophysics. So I went to La Palma. La Palma is in Spain. It's an island which is a heaven for telescope, I would say. There are so many telescopes, but the first telescope which I worked was, again, the Danish telescope at that time. It's still working. It's called Nordic Optical Telescope. And it was a small 2.5 meter telescope. And I worked on that. It was very funny, as you can see here. This was a telescope at the end of the rock, on the mountain. So half is on the mountain, the other half you can see is down. So when the telescope rotates during the nighttime of observation, you can see everything shaking up there. You kind of have a ride. I wouldn't say it's like a roller coaster, but it was like a ride. Or you might be sitting in a carousel, if you can imagine, and then when it settles to some position in the sky, then you start observing. So it was very fun experience. I learned quite a lot. There I get to know that, okay, although I'm working on the optical telescope and I know there is whole electromagnetic spectrum, but at La Palma, there was suite of telescope. Like there was this magic telescope, which you can see these mirrors up there. This is for gamma ray. In the background, this is infrared telescope, which was William Herschel telescope. So there were so many telescopes, big or small, even radio telescopes around that island. And mostly that island, if you search for it, it is famous for the telescopes over there or the bananas they are growing. So it was a very fun experience during my PhD. First time I worked with the telescope, but as a student. Later on, I applied for a fellowship with the European Southern Observatory. So European Southern Observatory currently is the world leader in the ground-based telescopes. They have telescopes mostly in Chile, as they call it, but coming from the Europeans, all the telescope you see down at the very end of the world in Chile. So in Chile, when I was as a fellow at the although with the German headquarters, I was a fellow. I was traveling 3 to 4 times a year to perform observation in Chile with these telescopes, which we call the Very Large Telescope. And as I said before, that they have, again, European Southern Observatory, or ESO we call it for short, has many facilities, which could be either optical, they even have radio, they have infrared, so, or sub-millimeter wavelength, like different energy regime which they look for. And they are, of course, in Chile, but at different regions. So the region where I was working was in the Atacama Desert of Chile, and the location or the mountain is called Paranal. So we were at the what we call Cerro Paranal, where are these the Very Large Telescopes working. And these telescopes were the most amazing experience I ever had. Not only they were bigger than the telescope which I worked as a student, so these were 8-meter telescopes, but at the same time, these telescopes were taking huge amount of data across the night. Each telescope has 3 different instruments. This helped me getting to know more about instruments, how they are working, how we are changing time, because ESO was very a professional hub. It wasn't like a student telescope or something. It was a full professional thing. And I was working there as a sport astronomer. I learned quite a lot. The tiny details of how instruments are working up to the very big details, how telescope in general are working, the infrastructure, how you can build around that. And ESO is now putting up soon in this decade, at the end, the 39-meter telescope, the biggest eye, what they call, on the planet. So it was a very fun experience. And not only working at the telescope, when I was at Cerro Paranal, or working for the Very Large Telescope at Paranal, the platform was amazing. You can see sunset, and every night it was a tradition before starting the night that you go up there, and all of these are astronomers. You see the sunset at the end, and you come down, and after that, after the last ray of sun gone, you start opening the telescope and work over the night. So it was very windy. Of course, it was a little chilly because we were at the mountain, but it was the most fun experience. I've never seen such a lane of Milky Way elsewhere in the world, and not as beautiful sunset which I've seen there. This then took me to another journey, and you can see how many transitions I have made across my time period. I came to the Siding Spring Observatory, or what we call SSO, which is near Dubbo in Australia. And the telescope, the biggest one there, is called Australian Astronomical Telescope. This is, of course, not as big, the Very Large Telescope. This is 4-meter. But again, this is performing from 1970s up till now and doing amazing science, which we even in Europe or everywhere else knows, because mostly it's a survey telescope, and lots of surveys the rest of the world already know coming from this telescope. So I came here after ESO as a research astronomer back in 2015, and I started working with the Australian Astronomical Telescope. Again, like La Palma, this place, the Siding Spring Observatory, is a hub of so many telescopes, as I said before. And this is the Australian Astronomical Telescope from inside. And the interesting instrument which they have in there was what we call 2DF, or 2-degree field instrument. And that instrument, as you can see, it has a robot, and it works with fibers. So in Europe, we were using single target observation, or in Chile, whatever you call. But as I said, we use single target observation. So you just run the telescope. Here, as for the surveys, we want to observe hundreds or thousands of stars or galaxies at the same time. And we use their fibers, where you can point each fiber, the same optical fiber like your internet, to the sky, and then each of them is pointing to a star or galaxy, and you can see things at once. And in this case, you can see 400 things at once, either they are stars or galaxy. And we use a robot there to position it, to put our fibers to the right places on the sky. And then we observe. Of course, here it is fun, as it is putting AAO characters at the end. But yes, it is running. It is still running the same 2DF instrument. It is running almost from 2 decades now. So lots of fun science this instrument has done. And this took me again to another journey, which wasn't as when I was working at ESO being part of, was just working with the telescopes or with the instrument. This time it was building the instrument. as AO is hub of building the instruments. And here I can tell you another exciting telescope, which is called the Taipan, UK Schmidt telescope, and which has an instrument called Taipan. And that was the instrument which I was involved building in, and these days I am commissioning it. And this instrument is also very interesting. Like if you remember the video before, it was picking a fiber and putting it on a metal plate. This time with Taipan, we are doing it on a glass field plate, which is like here. And each fiber has its own other technologies to turn that fiber into a walking robot. So each of these, if you can see here, will now walk on different positions of the sky. So instead of having an external robot, which is picking and placing the fiber to the position you want, these fibers can now walk themselves. So we call these fibers starbugs, and they are like walking robot. They move from one position to another position of the sky where you want. So that was interesting and innovative technology. And already to mention that for this new technology, we are already receiving from Americans 2 contracts, and we are working on these, and they are like $1 billion instruments which we are building. One, Australia is already part of it, and for other one, Australia is just building and delivering it. So not only research, also on the technology front, there is so much happening here. And it's my pleasure that for my journey, I've been part of such an amazing things. Now, as I mentioned that we are building 2 similar kind of instruments for American. One of them is actually the Giant Magellan Telescope, and Australia is already 10% partner of it. This is an upcoming telescope. It is not present at the moment, but this is like 25-meter telescope. So in astronomy now, the world is going to the time where they want to have bigger and bigger telescopes across the planet, as it's very, very expensive to go and observe things from space. It's cost a lot, so much energy involved. And if anything breaks, there is even further cost involved to send people either out there or get it working or bring it down and send it back. So ground telescopes were always in the game. And that's why the upcoming market is actually to build even bigger telescope than the ones we already know. For this Giant Magellan Telescope, as I said, it will be 25-meter telescope. It is not coming from one single mirror. It is coming from several small mirrors. These are, in this case, 7. So each of them will be at the end combining the light and making that telescope as a 25-meter. Right now, they are already building each of that mirror. 2 to 4, I think our mirrors are already polished and they've been sent to the telescope side. So it is still in construction phase, but in this decade, the timeline is around 2025 or later, this telescope will be up. To show you a little bit more, right now it is looking something like this. Right now, they already have some compartments there where workers are working, and then they are seeing, they already let the background, move the mountain top and flatten it up, and now building the telescope. So this is something looking like this, but in next 3-4 years, it will be something like this at the end. And then the right now, when it will open, it will be actually one of the biggest telescope on the planet then. And we, as I said, Australia is part of it, but at the same time, we are building an instrument for them, and that is part of everything what I am doing. So bigger and bigger projects. Imagine like I started from the time where I know nothing. I don't even know to be an astronomer, and now I am being part of such big projects, which I could never imagine in my high school that where I will be. So whatever you are now, I can imagine you might not see things beyond. Things are not there for you to also anticipate that what you will be doing in next 10 years or so. But if you always have some bigger aims, of course, you will always go to the next level, which you either have thought for or which you have never thought for. So that was always my mantra also when I was thinking that where I wanted to be. So if I tell in summary that what I was in high school, I know nothing. Like this girl know nothing that she will be one day an astrophysicist. At that time, I only know that I wanted to go abroad I wanted to chase the best ever opportunities, and I wanted to stay in STEM because I like physics and mathematics. So this was all I know at that time, and I was after that, and that's how for my bachelor's I picked the right subjects, which I should be picking because I wanted to be at least involved in physics. That was that time. But the girl there, which is of course me in 2005, that time I already know that how I wanted to go into that field, right? That time I already have read Stephen Hawking, and I was like, yes, I wanted to be an astrophysicist. I know how I wanted to be in this field and how I can be in, at least I know that. And for me, of course, option wasn't going for some subjects or something, as it wasn't option that time in Pakistan. But I know that, okay, if I continue reading and if I go on the right ways, then this will be the way for me to go. Luckily, I had good enough subjects. I will tell you a little bit in later, which helped me to be in astronomy. And then here during my PhD, this is me during my PhD defense. I was very proud that day that I made it to the field where I wanted to be. Of course, the path wasn't, most of the time it was uncertainty around at that time for me, but I be there where I wanted to be. So I knew in my master's period that yes, I wanted to be an astronomer, and I didn't know which path I should be choosing, but I've been there. I spent my time, and by 2011, I was an astronomer. What helped me, so what helped me were, of course, my STEM subjects. So STEM, as I said, that for everything, curiosity is the main driver in you. So if you are curious enough, you are keep asking, and you have that mindset, which is always very logical, which is very problem solving, then STEM subjects are for you. If you have, on the other hand, something, a brain which is very creative, you can read studies about if your right half or left half of the brain is more active, either you can be more creative or more logical. It doesn't mean that the person is not logical, but their influence or preference, is more towards creative things. So I know I was more always the logical thinking or the problem solving thinking mindset. And that's why for me, STEM subjects were always the thing which I choose for. And physics and maths were, of course, always with me all my time. And they were very relevant for my career. Like if I wanted to be an astrophysicist, of course, for me, physics and mathematics problem solving was very important. I wasn't towards engineering. I'm not saying that like if you are inclined to, you shouldn't be choosing, but you already know that together with logical thinking, you are also good in building things. So if you are in there, engineering is the game for you. Engineers and like researchers like us, we have different mindset. So from the beginning where your inclinations are, what you prefer doing and or what you like most doing, then you should choose at the very right time your right subjects. And for me, physics and maths were always the case. On top, as I already said about astronomy and lots of data being involved, and there is so much computational involved, that one more thing was plus with me during my bachelor's. I also picked information technology or IT, and I get to know so much of the programming and computation, which is still going with me. This is still helping me when I am building, for example, an instrument. I can make also a model of it, for example, or model of things that how my data will look at the end. So this was very, very important. Or the model I showed you, that how I end up getting, for example, iron this time in my dust curve. So things like this. So IT was very important. So in the beginning, if you have picked right subject, they will live with you. They will help you growing in that subject. Otherwise, over the time, if you change your course, you need to also spend more time and keep looking that, okay, now I need to learn another thing. So learning is, I'm not saying it's bad. We are always learning. I am still learning, for example. But if you have the basic subjects always right, and at the very early age, you will be growing those. You will be learning new things, not the very basics. So if you have basics right, they will help you always growing. For me, opportunities, if I highlight, I would say that for me, PhD opportunity was the highlight. Otherwise, at that time, I remember when I was in masters, I couldn't see myself going into PhD in astrophysics. And although I was doing a lot of reading, but at the same time, I was like, I end up being a particle physicist, because that is another problem solving thing which I can go for. Which although I didn't want it to be, but it was like, yes, as a young girl, I always wanted to do a PhD. I always wanted to go abroad and study there, or like all time I only think about higher education. So for me, PhD was a thing, but yes, PhD in astrophysics was the opportunity which turned me to where I am, or where I wanted to be. If I wouldn't be given that opportunity, and especially if that or I would say luckily, if that written test would have never happened, I would have never be able to grab that opportunity and change my life and career. So that was the biggest opportunity, which I would always always mention. And then this, of course, for me, the special path I took, as I mentioned before, was a lot of reading and problem solving. I can't have those, but I have notebooks at those time, like big pile of notebooks, which I just sit and for a couple of hours with music turned on, and I was just problem solving. And I love doing that. So I knew that time. So that you must be also knowing at this time where you want, what you like doing. And now to turn it into the career is now the time. So finishing your high school now is now the time. Already know that what you like, and now where I want to see myself, what my career should be. This is now the time to think and put efforts into that direction. Then if I want to advise my younger self at that time, some things listed here are what I followed, some things which I didn't. Like, I know from that time I want to follow my passion. My passion was studying outside, for example. At that time, wanted to be in physics somewhere. Of course, now it's astrophysics, because I get to know that very late. But it was like I had an ambition, I had that passion from the very beginning, and I was always following that. I was always good in setting targets, and I was always keep, like when I wanted to be in astrophysics, I was setting the right targets before they were broad targets, and then I was narrowing those down, and I was working on those. And for me, always it is like, if you have no ambition, if you have no sense of achievement, then you have nothing. Like, you have a plain blank life. This I was never after. It gets to me very frustrating if I think about that. Then big things which I always still follow is, I don't leave things for future. Even if now I have a deadline, I will start working on it, because it's also me who takes pressure. But I also believe at the same time, what you do today will build your future tomorrow. So if you haven't done much enough today, and you are leaving things for tomorrow, tomorrow will be very hard. You are also skimming down your time, and then it will become even more tougher for you to chase whatever you want. So what you do today will help you build your tomorrow. And especially in your lifetime now, when you are you wanted to build your career, it is very important that you focus on today. Otherwise you will spend next 5-10 years to build that. What I didn't do at that time was, I wasn't that confident. I was a very, very shy girl. I didn't know. I always thought that whatever question I am putting, I'm going to put a wrong question. So I should not be asking. I was very, very shy. But now if I see myself now, I would be saying that I should be even more confident. I should have that self-belief. And then I should be asking questions. And for you, I can only say that if you are not asking questions now, instead, you should ask why I'm not asking question. Ask yourself first. If there is any like stupid reason behind that, ignore it. My PhD supervisor at that time given me the best ever advice, because he found at that time that I was very shy. He said to me at that time that, oh, you should be asking question. At like, the most people can say you is no, like, I don't know, or I don't want to tell you. They are not going to kill you. They are not going to do anything bad to you. So at least ask. You might be 50 times or more than 50 times, 70, 80 times, you receive an answer, and that will help you rather than spending hours and hours searching for it. Just ask someone. At the same time, I would say in your era, which wasn't in my time, is that with your phone, with your computer, whatever, there is so much information up there in that virtual world. If you see so much information at the same time, but let me tell you, there is also so much misinformation in these time, and you can get all of this information and misinformation online. For you, it is important to have a mentor, a role model for you, which you can see. Okay, role model, normally you might not be after everyone because you might just see and admire them, but a mentor is very important. Someone which can tell you, which can help you guiding, someone which is a living which had a living experience, and then they can tell you out of your living experience. Mentors keep changing, and good that you don't call them formally even a mentor, but you in your mind you believe that there is someone as a mentor, someone sitting there. If I'm going with a question, they can help me. They could be your teachers, they could be someone you admire, they could be your neighbors, for example, could be anyone who you know that can help me with certain problems. So you should have that. Rather than going to this information or misinformation online, it is important that you have some person who can give you living example. Then your misinformation will be diluted and you will go into the right direction. They can even help with your career, your personal problems or whatever. So you should have your mentors. And in my times, when I was a student, I actually had mentors, and that was the thing which turned me over life. I of course has less role models because there wasn't any role model at my times whom I can follow. And the role model when I first get to know was Stephen Hawking through his book. So you need those, you need something as an inspiration. You need someone whom you can talk to and whom you also have a trust that this person can answer me. So that is very important, and that's my advice to you. Very lastly, I've shown you my old photo, never shown someone before. It was very old times, but still that girl knowing nothing. In 2012, I received, when I was living in Marseille in France, I received from the mayor of Marseille an award for excellent contribution in science, which is here. So I still have that certificate sitting with me. And I remember the girl who know nothing, who don't even know she can be an astronomer, she was receiving such an award. Then I went to Homeward Bound with the, which is actually coming from Melbourne, but now it is a global thing. It is woman leadership, it is a woman leadership program which brings women from different fields in science and put them together. And we have a leadership or strategic, what we call a coursework around the full year. And then we travel to Antarctica. So this was me when I traveled in 2018 to Antarctica and be in one of those female leaders around the world. So it was for me also a very big thing at that time. Or even now that I am part of such a big group, I am part of the world STEM leaders. And that girl who didn't, as a young girl, know more than being a physicist, no, she ended up there. And then recently I got this in 2020, the Australian Young Tall Poppy Award from the New South Wales. And now, as being a science communicator and with you today for my science contribution and communication, I got that award. So these were the biggest highlights for me. Again, wrapping up, I would say, as a young girl at your age, I don't know that I will be getting these things. You can't set, like in my case, you can't set 15 years or something that you will achieve. But your bigger picture, my bigger picture was, I wanted to be a physicist as a young girl, and later I wanted to be an astrophysicist. So this is what I am doing at your age. I don't know much, but of course, my journey across my lifetime took me to different paths, and I love going that. If I summarize all of this, I started from Pakistan, where I've done my master's. And to be an astrophysicist, I went to Copenhagen, Denmark, and there I lived. I traveled across now all 7 continents, and I lived on 3 different continents already. So from Europe, I went to France for a postdoc. Then I went to Germany, wherever, for Chile also. I was traveling to Chile 3 to 4 times a year to observe with the telescopes. And then now from last 6 years, I am in Australia. So my science journey was very adventurous also. And so much of a moving I have done across my lifetime. But I had some amazing things. If I see myself 20 years back, I see I don't know nothing. And if I see all my journey, I want in that era to know more, to have more information as you guys have now. And might be my world would have been more different, but I'm thankful to what I have now, because in that time I have never thought of being this woman what I am now. So together with all that, I would say you all, thank you for listening me.
Well, thanks so much for that presentation, Tayaba. That was an absolutely fantastic glimpse into your career and your work, and I'm sure the insights that you provided today into your own journey in STEM has inspired members of our audience. So thanks again. We really only have a couple of minutes for our Q&A, so sorry about that, but we have had a couple of questions come through from our audience members. So I just want to start with a quick throwback to your work with dust. And the question is, can you collect this dust from space? And if so, how do you do that?
Yes, we have actually collected. So there are already some interplanetary space dust, which we call it. So there are some airborne satellites which already sometime collect. And even if there is a comet, you know that there is a mission going on, landing on a comet, so it will be collecting that dust. So we already have done this, but the dust which I was talking about, this interstellar dust. So interplanetary dust within our solar system, we have done it, we have studied it, and we are studying it at the same time when I'm talking. But yes, interstellar dust is very hard, which can brings your star. So yes, part of it, not all of it.
Yeah. And also in your work examining this dust and gas and metals of distant galaxies, what in particular are you hoping to discover, and why is this research important?
This research is important because it is at the end telling us that how our life or the life on Earth came into form. So as we all know that we are coming from somewhere from the elements in the stars. So if we wanted to know that how our life formed, or if we are the only one, are there more people around us whom we don't know, who might look or not look like us, where these people are, it is very important to understand. And how all of this form, are we very unique? Are we rare? Are we the only one? If we want to hunt these puzzles, yes, then astronomy is very important, and dust is also then very important, that what other different type of dust can form different people like us, not humans, different things or different life forms. Fantastic.
And another question that's come through is, what was the name of the leadership program that took you to Antarctica? And perhaps you might be able to talk a bit about the significance of Antarctica and why it's important to in this particular field.
So that particular program is called Homeward Bound, and it's a leadership program. This is for like women and girls in STEM. Anywhere from, if you are doing significant enough work in STEM, you are an excellent science, for example, communicator, or at the same time you are doing some things for the environment, you can even apply from your graduation time. I have seen some young graduates applying for that, and they are going at the end, or people even in their masters. You don't need to be at the very top level, but yes, anyone can apply who is doing a good enough amount of communication in science, and at the same time who cares for their environment. If you are doing something, the reason to take us to Antarctica was that Antarctica, where humans aren't living, it shouldn't be impacted, but what else we are doing in the rest of the planet, Antarctica is affected, and now the ice there is melting, and the ice there, as you know, is so much that it can flood the whole planet. So what we should not be doing to stop this happening. So all this thing about climate change, that took us at the end to Antarctica. And for this, if we need to be vocal enough in science that we can spread that, the impacts happening not in Antarctica, but because of the climate change on the rest of our lives.
Yeah, it must have been an amazing place to visit. Now, I think that best place to finish our discussion. I hate to bring our discussion to a close so quickly, but the final question we have that's come through is, do you have any regrets? Or I suppose another way to rephrase that would be, what is the biggest lesson you've learned along your career so far?
What I learned so far is that, yes, I would call it that there could be some regrets all the way across your life. But to me, when I see that, oh, I said it in my presentation, I should have known before, or I should have asked myself before when I was a young, in my high school. I was a very shy girl, and whenever I look back, oh, if I would have seen that thing or solved that puzzle that time, or asked myself questions that time, I would have been in a different position now, or been in a better position. So overall, if I say where I am in my career, no bigger regrets. But where next step I could have been might be because of me not asking myself or other people question, I might not be into that level. So just it's the difference of stages where I could have been. So that is the only regret which I think, oh, I know that person at that time, and he could have helped me or answered me that certain thing. But I didn't find courage in myself to ask that time question, and no, there is no one who can answer me best about this thing. So
Yeah.
this is still in my life, and still sometimes that shy girl come out, and I don't ask, and later I regret. So I think it is very important, even if we have a stupid question, we should put it across.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that was a great place to finish. So I wish I didn't have to bring this discussion to an end, but we're out of time, unfortunately. So I'm sure you'll all join me in giving Dr. Tayaba Zafar a big virtual round of applause. And on behalf of everyone joining in today, I'd like to offer a very big thank you for being so generous with your insights and advice. To our audience, we'll be in touch again soon, seeking your feedback on this session. But with that, thanks for joining today, and I hope you have a terrific rest of the week. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.